So a little over a year ago, I played Sekiro, which was my first From Software game. I had heard for many years how hard the Soulsborne games were, and I finally decided to take the plunge. I started with Sekiro because I had heard it was the hardest, so I figured if I could beat that, then I could do the Souls series. I wound up beating the game 5 times and platinuming it. And while I am not going to sit here and say it was easy, it is certainly more than fair. I was expecting some insurmountable challenge given the way people talk about these games, but it was very manageable. Was it difficult? Sure, but it was far from impossible. No boss took me more than a couple hours to beat, which, to be clear, that is quite a long time to beat a boss, but some people talk about these games like they're impossible. After that, I started my Souls journey starting with Demon's Souls. I hated that game. It was boring as hell and the difficulty was purely cheap and artificial. Tight corridors that force you to engage with enemies, hidden enemies that attack you from around a corner, undodgeable your first time because you don't know what's coming, but then repeat run-throughs just make them boring and an annoying roadblock. The whole game is designed like this, which makes it more annoying and frustrating than difficult. I never felt like I was challenged in any way other than my patience because it was so fucking boring. And then the majority of the bosses just have some gimmick, so you can't just square off with them with traditional means and use your skill to beat them. Well, you can, but it takes forever. Rather, you're meant to figure out their gimmick to overcome them. Again, this to me is not fun, it's annoying. My thumbnail for this game made lots of people tell me to get good, and that I was fucked for the rest of my Souls journey if I found this game hard, but ironically, they all got easier. Dark Souls wasn't that difficult at all. Ornstein and Smough is lauded as a super hard and iconic boss, but if you've played any other video game that has combat and you understand enemy manipulation and positioning, it isn't that hard at all. Just bait out an attack and kite the enemies around the room and you'll have zero issue. Same with Bell Gargoyles. They attack you individually. You don't really even have to juggle them both at once, other than just having to watch out for their fire attack. I would argue some Silksong bosses have you juggling way more things at once than even the worst gank bosses in a Souls game. Many people say that Silksong is harder than Elden Ring, and it's a very difficult comparison to make because they are such different games with different playstyles. So depending on your strengths, you may excel at one more than the other. But I will say that having played all the Souls games now and a few Souls-likes, that they don't quite live up to the reputation that they've garnered. I think part of this is due to time. Demon's Souls or Dark Souls may have been difficult for their era, and there were no games really like them at the time, so their perceived difficulty was much higher. But playing these games in 2026, they definitely don't seem that difficult. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying these games are bad or that they're easy. I think they are exceptional video games, which is a big reason I'm making this video. If you were ever turned off by the idea of these games because you had heard they were too hard, don't be. Play them and enjoy them as much as I did. From March to July, I played the entire series, and it has been some of the most fun gaming I've ever had in my life. They offer a fun challenge and an amazing experience along the way with some of the best world design and enemy variety I've ever experienced in video games. Again, as I mentioned, their reputation is probably more of a product of their time than anything else, but all the people saying get good need to cool it with their ego. These games are not that hard, and being able to no-hit a boss or beat them at a soul level 1 is simply a test of perseverance and practice more than anything. It isn't some massive test of skill. Yes, it does take some skill, but more than anything, it's just repetition and practice, which is truly how you get good at anything. I would argue pound for pound, looking at difficulty as objectively as possible in the terms of mechanical skill with your fingers, Path of Pain in a game like Hollow Knight is far more difficult to complete than pretty much any Souls boss. Speaking of Hollow Knight, completing Pantheon 5 was also a monumentally difficult challenge, and there are ways to make that even harder on yourself by using the binding system. Beating Pantheon 5 is a harder challenge than any boss in Soulsborne, and doing it with bindings is akin to beating all Elden Ring bosses at Soul Level 1 with no weapon upgrades. Promise Concert Dawn and Malenia are pretty much the toughest bosses in the entire series, and they certainly offer a great challenge, but you would think the entirety of the Soulsborne genre is filled with bosses like that with the way some people talk about Souls games. I recently did a weapon level 0 run of Elden Ring just for some added challenge, and yes, it did provide a good challenge, I want to be clear, but this was an optional handicap that I imposed upon myself, not the base difficulty of the game. It is certainly not how FromSoft intended the game to be played, because Elden Ring is also the easiest game in the series, with how many ways you can just straight up abuse the game's mechanics to delete even the hardest bosses like Malenia and Radahn. and with those systems being in the game, they're more than fair to use. In fact, I would say it's encouraged, as the game obviously gives you these resources for a reason. I used to be a great Destiny 2 player, and I can tell you that completing a day 1 raid is far harder than any Souls boss. It takes great skill along with strong sandbox knowledge to make a build to overcome the specific encounter, and puzzle solving skills to perform the mechanics while being bombarded by enemy attacks that hurt you tremendously on contest mode. And I have not played World of Warcraft, but I know some of those raid releases take weeks to complete. They are highly coordinated efforts with dozens of players, tons of time and preparation go into them, and you have to execute at a high level for an extremely long time. A Souls boss, you just have to worry about its moveset, and if you aren't handicapping yourself, the fight takes 2 to 3 minutes on average, and you can drastically reduce the number of hits it takes to take it down by optimizing your build on even the most surface level. I beat every single Dark Souls final boss from Demon Souls to Dark Souls 3 on my very first attempt. This isn't me bragging, it's just reality, but the final boss in those games aren't that hard. It's more a testament to the fact that the game gives you the skills throughout your playthrough to overcome the bosses. I struggled on certain bosses for a while, for sure, but all that struggling made me better at the game, and being an RPG, I was able to leverage my build, which was only ever a big sword and speccing into strength and endurance, to be able to do lots of damage in a single attack. So again, very surface level build with minimal optimization, and I was able to first try all the final bosses. I didn't even have to learn their movesets because From Software does a great job of telegraphing attacks with animations and sound cues. Again, something that makes the games more than fair. Some fights are certainly kind of tough or have some BS baked into them, and having to avoid enemies during the fight, or taking out ads, or fighting the camera because the boss is too big for the screen, but for the most part, they're very fair. You can also summon NPCs for certain fights to make them even easier, and while I did avoid this as much as I could, I did end up beating Starscourge Radahn on my very first attempt with NPCs, or the Duke's Deer Freya. I had summoned an NPC and then beat it on my first try. But this is another point I want to talk about. The game also gives you a litany of resources to make boss fights easier, from rings or talismans to strengthen your build to a variety of weapons which can be better or worse for certain boss fights. If you are struggling with a boss, you can look on the wiki what the boss is weak to and then leverage that to your advantage. I did this in Elden Ring. I was doing piss poor damage to a frost dragon and my chat told me it was weak to strike damage. So I switched weapons and went on to defeat it with ease on the next attempt. Could I have kept fighting it with way less damage? Of course, it would still be possible to beat, but again, why not utilize the tools available to you? If you want to play as a magic caster, go right ahead. If you want to beat every boss no-hit at soul level 1 with no weapon upgrades, then you do you. Everyone likes a different level of challenge and is welcome to play the game however they find most enjoyable. But don't think that these are some brutally punishing games that only elite gamers can ever beat. The game absolutely gives you all the means you need to beat them, and the beauty of gaming in the modern age is the spread of information. There are entire wikis dedicated to these games that can help you with anything you might be wondering about, and YouTube likely has a dozen guides on any boss that you could come across. Not that you need to use these. I enjoy figuring things out on my own and playing how I want to, so I just used the first weapon that clicked with me and upgraded my stats accordingly. Doing this, I found no issue with any boss and was able to beat them all with a weapon that I acquired very early into each game. But if you are struggling, use these other resources and don't feel ashamed for doing so. Hell, I've made guides on Destiny 2 and Silksong and some have hundreds of thousands of views. You're far from the only person to have to go online to look up a guide for something that you're stuck on. We all do it. Anyways, I just wanted to make this video as a PSA to say that these games are not that difficult, so if you've been intimidated about trying them, then now is your sign. If this video inspired you to give them a go, please let me know down in the comments. Let me know which Souls games you're going to try, and let me know how your experience was. If you get stuck on a tough boss, don't just give up, try a different strategy or look up some tips on how to beat it. I really think you can surprise yourself and overcome the challenge, and it feels great when you do. That's the main purpose of this video. As someone who is a Souls outsider until 2025, I definitely thought they were going to be crazy difficult with the way people spoke about them. All those get good comments now just make me laugh because these games have no reason to get an ego over. People need to get over themselves if they think this is the pinnacle of gaming difficulty. With that being said though, I do love that these games do have a base level of difficulty, as it forces people to rise to a certain level to overcome roadblocks rather than just changing the difficulty setting. So so everyone gets more or less the same experience. You can't just make it easier, and I think that's awesome because it pushes people to improve, and they will often be amazed at how much better they can get if they just put in time and practice. Anyways, that's it. I'll be diving into Liza P and 9 Souls very soon on stream, so check me out on Twitch at itstizzle7 if you want to watch that. I'm curious how those games stack up in terms of difficulty. Let me know in the comments what the hardest game you have ever played is, as I'm very curious. Lastly, if you're still here, thanks so much for watching to the end. It means a lot. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.